Welcome to the LSU Sports Insider, brought to you by the journalists at The Advocate, NOLA.com, and the Times-Picayune. Perryn Keys here in your top left box, coming to you from an undisclosed location in Florida. The weather's been great, but I have so far avoided any kind of Florida man interactions. There's been nobody running down the freeway, on bath salts or anything like that. So I'm going to call it a win. Hopefully, be able to get back home to the newsroom in one piece. And maybe with some mouse ears, just for you, Rab. Scott Rabalais on the top right box, our venerable longtime columnist. And, of course, Wilson Alexander, our lead LSU football beat reporter on the bottom box. We are here. That's right, Rab. We are here to discuss some football. It's that time of year, if you can believe it, actually. It's end of February, and, of course, every other sport at LSU, or almost every other sport, is going on underneath the sun. But we are on the eve, or almost eve, of spring practice. And there's quite a bit of personnel news and things of that nature to discuss. So what better time than February 28th than to talk a little bit of football? How you guys doing today?
Doing well. Looking forward to spring ball starting next week on Tuesday. I think it's going to be a little bit more intriguing than it was last year. There's just a lot more going on, and especially on the defensive side, it'll be fascinating to see what sort of answers we can actually glean from spring practice, because usually it's hard to glean much, but because there's been so much difference, I think it's going to be a pretty interesting month ahead.
I happen to agree, Rab.
There'd better be one word answer. You ready? Improvement. There has to be improvement. And it's hard to tell from practice. I tell people all the time, I've covered LSU when they went 2-9, and I've covered them when they won the national championship. And there's not a lot of difference when you're watching the amount of practice we get to watch. But we could kind of tell going into the season. Wilson may agree or disagree. We could kind of tell last year that they're just not stopping the offense. And the offense was great, obviously. Number one in the country in total offense and scoring. But they should be able to stop them once in a while. So there's got to be some signs of improvement. And I think that'll become apparent over the course of the spring.
The defense was the question mark going into last year during camp, and it was the question mark going out. And so we are here to see if LSU, of course, and report, of course, on whether LSU is making strides to fix that. A bit of business, as always. We will get into this. Will be an all defense podcast, or close to it. We will get into all that, but of course we need to hit a bit of business first, as always. If you're tuning in or listening to us, you already know that the Advocate's always been the number one destination for LSU football coverage, for sure. And so if you're not subscribed to the Advocate, whether that's print or digital, please do subscribe. Go to theadvocate.com/subscribe. As I mentioned a moment earlier, pretty much every other sport is going on campus. And so there's a lot to try to keep track of. And the best way to do that, or one of the best ways to do that, is to get our newsletter, our LSU newsletter delivered straight to your inbox. It's a daily newsletter. You'll get the headlines sent straight to your desktop, to your inbox, to your phone. Rab, of course, handles that 3 days per week, but it's a daily newsletter. We appreciate that. So
today is one of those days, by the way.
That's right. I'm surprised you're not bouncing off the wall there, that you're actually falling out of the screen with excitement to be able to finish off that newsletter tonight. So yeah, it's like Christmas. Just can't wait for the moment. So anyhow, Rab will take care of that. And so he'll take care of all of you who are subscribed to the LSU newsletter. So please subscribe and stay up to date. To do that, you go to theadvocate.com/LSU newsletter. We are here on the LSU Sports Insider every Monday and Thursday on all our social channels, specifically the YouTube channel, LSU Tigers on NOLA.com. Please subscribe there. You can stay up to date there. You can watch us live every Monday and Thursday. If you don't catch us live, you can catch us there on that same YouTube channel after the fact. And again, we are here. If you don't catch us here on Monday or Thursday, you can catch us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever other finer podcasts are found. And on every Monday and Thursday, we are brought to you by Champion Wealth Strategies. Champion Wealth Strategies is a national financial services firm specializing in the capital markets, securities, insurance, 401ks, and college and retirement planning. Our broker-dealer is LPL, financial member FINRA, SIPC. As you know, investments are not FDIC insured, may lose value, and have no bank guarantee. Contact Champion Wealth Strategies and plan like a champion today. Okay, so gentlemen, we let's get into it, and let's start with the most obvious change to the LSU defense, which is of course the defensive coordinator Blake Baker. He's now here; he's in charge. And Wilson, you had the ability to speak to Brian Kelly one-on-one just the other day, and plenty of that information is already up at theadvocate.com. But tell us what he told you about what he expects from Blake Baker and the defense in general.
The thing that maybe stood out to me the most in terms of what the most notable change will be defensively and what LSU is going for here with a new hire is the style and approach to defense in terms of, the words that Brian Kelly said described Blake Baker's defense is at both Missouri and Miami, really wherever he's been, is that they are not a bend but don't break defense. And I asked him, I was like, is that kind of how you would characterize what y'all did last year? He said it kind of had to be. I think he means, what they had defensively sort of dictated that in some ways. But it also, you ended up seeing, lots of soft coverage and just sort of a lack of aggression on the defensive side of the ball. And I feel like they're going to try to get back to that. One thing Kelly mentioned, and, this is correct. I mean, LSU hasn't really had a top defense now in going on, gosh, what would we say? At least 4 seasons? 5, maybe more than that. I mean, I
would say 2019.
Yeah, and so they're trying to, and even that had some flaws in spots, and not to nitpick, but they're trying to really resuscitate. Defense has been down now for probably about 4 years, and so he described Blake Baker as his first choice when they parted ways with Matt House. And one of the things he said about Matt House and the defensive staff as a whole was that leadership is being able to get your players to go from point A to point B. And that wasn't happening. And there was just a sort of disconnect in terms of communication that couldn't continue. And so that's obviously partially led to, clearing out the staff and bringing in all these new coaches, starting with Blake. And so fascinating to see kind of what he does schematically and if that style really is, if you're able to glean that. Like Rab said, it's harder to really tell in practice. But if they're actually like attacking and getting downhill, maybe we'll be able to get some sense of that here in the spring.
Rab, you've seen plenty of defensive coordinators come and go. We never know for sure, but we do know a little bit about Blake Baker, obviously. He Clear Lake, Texas to Tulane. He's certainly been around the state, obviously Louisiana Tech, and then, of course, 1 year here at LSU as the linebackers coach under Ed Ogeron. Just generally speaking, I know you gave a one-word answer, which really does sort of sum it all up. But let's get down to the details. Improvement. What should we expect to see? Obviously, just sort of in the very, very early stages of spring practice. What are the sort of the foundational things that you're going to be looking for?
Aggressiveness. Not letting the offense just dictate terms to the defense at all times. I think we expect it'll still be a pretty good offense this season. Showing some more pressure, different kind of looks and things. Maybe just some moments where Garrett Nussmeier has to think a little bit about what he's doing and check down to that guy. And right. Then of course in the secondary, and just as I know Wilson has said many times, playing good fundamental defense.
Yes.
They won't tackle to the ground a lot in the spring, but just being there, in position and being ready to make the tackle and giving the impression that they would make a play if this was real action. So just those kind of things. I thought it was very interesting. And if y'all haven't read Wilson's stories that he got out of his interview with Brian Kelly earlier this week, you got a couple of them out of there. Must reading if you're an LSU football fan. And just the interesting thing that he said there was basically things were lost in translation with the other staff. They didn't get their points across. They didn't communicate well to what they wanted the players to do. So maybe in Brian Kelly's mind, at least, I don't know if in the mind of all of us as media or people who are fans, it indicates that he thinks they have players who can do things, can play better than they showed last year if they're more confident. And I like the line. Wilson was something like, he said something like that, just make them feel confident. And feeling confident is a big part of it. And I thought that was an interesting thing. A lot of defense is attitude and emotion and just thinking you can make the play. And I think that's kind of what Brian Kelly is looking for. So just some of that. and that's intangible to a certain degree, what I'm talking about. But I think it's like the old saying about what's art. You know it when you see it. I think we'll know it when we see it, if we see those kinds of markers with this LSU defensive group in the spring. Just little hints and glimpses, but just something that says they're moving forward and they're getting better.
Rab, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head in terms of kind of just like the fundamentals and that attitude, confidence piece of it. Talking to Brian Kelly today, it's like kind of what he's like leadership, like beyond the X's and O's schematics of what LSU is going to change, which I don't think is going to be like totally completely different, more of like your attitude and your style. No, look, there'll be differences, but like formationally, it's not like they're suddenly going from like 3-4 defense to 4-3, and it's all gonna be different because Matt House was kind of multiple last few years. Blake Baker will be multiple. There are some differences that we'll probably get into here in a minute in terms of like some different positional names and stuff like that. But what they want to do, particularly here in the spring when you're still sort of laying down the foundation of everything, is exactly that, is just sort of like rebuild up that confidence, and that regardless of what gets called, regardless of what it is schematically and formationally, that you feel like you're going to be successful. That's kind of what Brian Kelly was getting at, and that's what they sort of lost that feeling last year. And I think that's something that, again, I don't know if we're going to be able to tell in the spring, but it'll probably be very apparent pretty quickly come September against USC, and then the beginning part of the season, is if they are feeling that way defensively, that they're just going to go out there and be able to make plays and play fast. That's kind of what they're trying to achieve from a attitude and a mindset standpoint.
Something that just sort of struck me as you guys were talking. This is something that, and I'm genuinely asking your opinion, or asking you to sort of use what is likely a better memory bank than what I've got right now. One of the things you could, what they always say about, if your starting quarterback gets injured and the backup has to come in, or if this is a rookie quarterback or a freshman quarterback, an untested quarterback, one of the things you look for is to see when they get the playoff. In other words, how many seconds are left on the play clock when they snap the ball. If they're down to 0 or down to 1 or 2 or having to take a timeout, well, that's a sign. Okay, this guy, we don't know if he's in command, right? We don't know if he knows what he's doing. It felt to me, and maybe this is my mind and bad memory playing tricks on me, but it felt to me a lot looked like these guys are sort of trying to still figure out what to do after the opposing offense, goes in motion or resets or whatever, it makes a shift or something like that. That it was pretty late before the snap, that they were still trying to sort of get themselves all sorted out. Am I losing it there, or is my memory better than I think it is?
Sure. Sorry, I thought Rab might go. It's I don't think that your memory's off on that. I mean, I feel like it's not like they were necessarily for most of the season like completely out of sorts defensively right at the snap necessarily. And like guys like not getting lined up. I feel like there wasn't like hurriedly like trying to tell somebody to move. Like that was such a, I don't know, in my memory of it, it wasn't necessarily like they were always like hurriedly getting lined up and not, but obviously after the snap, like the run fits weren't good and the pursuit angles were bad. And so I guess that probably speaks to that in some degree. And also defensively, because they were so often sort of dropping into soft zone coverages and sort of falling away from the ball, they were always reacting to whatever the offense was doing. They were never dictating the terms of engagement. And maybe that's kind of what you're speaking to.
Yeah.
That's what we said. Wilson and I was sitting at every game last year over and over. We said to each other, why not take some more chances? Why aren't they taking more chances with the blitz or different kinds of coverages? Because you're giving them big plays and big yards and points anyway. Why? And you've got an offense that can do so many great things, and it just seemed like it's like maybe they just don't trust these guys to do it. But again, I get the impression from Brian Kelly that he thinks he's got some players who can at least do it reasonably well. And just with the right leadership and the right mindset in the right direction.
Certainly by reputation. I mean, we all think that the front seven certainly had, maybe a question about one position here, one position there, but certainly by name and reputation, you had a bunch of players out there, the first of whom we're going to talk about here in a minute, Harold Perkins. Don't you feel like they had, players with a pretty good rep that you felt like they should be in position to, as you say, not overrun, not over pursue, not miss an assignment, miss a tackle, have a bad run fit, all that kind of thing. And so I don't know. Certainly some of that was he should feel like he's gotten off. Maybe they didn't feel like that about the secondary going into last year, and that a lot of that sort of bore itself out to be true. But no, I think they've got players, right? And let's while I keep rambling, let's hit on player number one. Star number one, the man who wears jersey number 4 on defense, Harold Perkins. Wilson, you made note, obviously, in a story that's up at theadvocate.com as well. That was sort of maybe the biggest piece of news coming out of your conversation with Kelly is that we're going to keep trying this guy inside. Can you just talk a little bit more about that?
If at first you don't succeed, try again, I guess, because one game last year, LSU playing Harold Perkins inside moved away from it completely. I think, as everybody knows, he ends up playing more of the Sam linebacker, sort of a nickel linebacker role in the defense. Ends up getting him into a spot where he's settled and able to affect the game to some degree, more so than he was playing inside linebacker. But that still never really maximized what Harold can do so well. And the idea here is to get him back into the box, around the action, playing, more like that stack backer. And if in this Blake Baker defense that on paper looks much more aggressive than what Matt House was running and what Brian Kelly expects to be a more aggressive style than what LSU had last year, maybe this time it can work. We also know that Blake Baker has a strong track record over the last few years of developing linebackers. Here in 2021 with Damone Clark, became the nation's second leading tackler and a Butkus finalist. And then at Missouri over the last 2 years, Tyrone Hopper became a Butkus finalist as well. And he might be the closest comp to Harold Perkins because he's about, I think, maybe 6'2", 220, and Harold's like 6'1", 220. And the way that they play linebacker might be a blueprint for what LSU can do with Harold Perkins playing inside. He's specifically going to be the will linebacker, which is the weak side linebacker. Not that that's something that I think the sort of casual fan needs to fully understand, but basically, he's going to be playing inside more than he was last year. And look, they're going to have to. It's on coaching and it's on Harold. Brian Kelly has said this a couple of times now that Harold's got to play better too. He's got to be able, but the coaching also has to help him get to that point to maximize what he does so well. Let him be aggressive. Go see the ball, get the ball. There's nobody else really better in college football than just see ball, get ball. And they didn't really let him do that last year. And now he's not going to be doing that as a spy linebacker coming off the edge like he was as a freshman. That role was so simplified. They want him to be able to do more. They see his future as doing more, being kind of this weak side linebacker. And so, they're going to have to be able to coach him into that better. He's going to have to play better. One thing that he's going to really have to improve on, because we know Harold can rush the passer, but is also, as an inside linebacker, being able to absorb run blocks and fit the run. He's going to have to get better in that regard. That's going to be a big thing over the course of the offseason because he was just getting taken out of the play by Florida State's offensive lineman when he was playing inside last year. But one of the other things that you saw in that game, even though it's just the one game sample size, is that he was so often just dropping into coverage if LSU's defensive style is going to be more aggressive, then maybe he'll be getting downhill a little bit more. The other element to this that's important to note, and kind of referencing what I said a minute ago about some positional changes in terms of what Blake Baker is going to do defensively, is LSU is now going to have what's called a star position. The star is a kind of a cross between what Harold did last year and a nickel corner. And it's usually played by defensive backs. It's pretty prevalent in football, but it hasn't been something that's been used at LSU for a few years now. And you see it at Georgia and Alabama quite often. Like the LA Rams, when Jalen Ramsey was there a few years ago, he was playing the star position to kind of give you a reference point of like what kind of players usually in that spot. And Brian Kelly said that that's not what they want Harold to be. And so that sort of somewhat necessitates and dictates this move as well back to inside linebacker, because if the role that he was in last year is now kind of named something different in the defense and they don't want him to be in that, then you got to find a different spot for him.
Rab, I'm sorry, I may have cut you off there. I apologize. I was just going to say, I understand that maybe when this news initially comes out that they're going to, move him inside and keep him there. that maybe it's a good thing you guys are sitting down for this but it's going to be a big surprise that, the LSU fan base gets a little hostile, gets a little jumpy, gets a little touchy, gets a little upset over things. Sometimes.
Pitchforks.
Yeah, that was timely. Well done.
Thank you.
But no, listen, I mean, just because he's moving inside doesn't mean we're going to see him play the same way, the same role necessarily. There's number one, they're going to have another whole 8 months to teach him or close to it. But also the other thing is that just because somebody lines up X amount of time at the inside linebacker position, it doesn't mean that you can't have him go fill, have some other responsibility on a given play. Who knows where Rab, you'll remember this, Carl Mecklenburg and Lawrence Taylor and those guys. I mean, they moved these guys all over the field and found different ways to give him a route to the quarterback, so to speak, or to, have him show blitz and then drop back in a hook zone or something like that. So, really what I read from that is, again, it sort of really goes back to the first and main theme that you guys discussed, which is to say, maybe you believe in your players and you've got a good reason to believe in your players and you believe in this coaching staff doing a better job, this new coaching staff, defensive coaching staff, doing a better job teaching and communicating and getting these guys in the right position. Anything on that, Rab, you want to sort of riff off of?
First of all, it's somewhat ironic, and ironic is an overused word, but Harold Perkins lost some of that instinctiveness and the ability to disrupt the game last year, except in the Missouri game when he dropped back into coverage and made the interception that saved that game. And I would argue saved LSU's season, that one play, because it kept LSU from falling way behind and they came back to win. And then, of course, if they go on to lose 5 or 6 games, Jaden Daniels has won the Heisman and all that stuff. But there wasn't enough of that last season. He lost his instinctiveness. He looked like he didn't know what to do at times. And maybe that goes back to the communication between coach and player. I agree with you. Yeah, just because he plays inside linebacker, they're saying he's going to be there, doesn't mean you can't move him around and do creative things. I certainly hope they will. And that has got to be the case, because he's got to be the guy who affects the offense and makes them go away from him and makes them do things that they don't really want to do. And the equivalent of Paul Skeens. Remember, we saw teams last year alter their pitching lineup because they didn't want to just waste their ace against Paul Skeens because they knew they were going to lose. So right. The offenses you have to put offenses in that kind of position with Harold Perkins, and he's one player out of 11, obviously. But I know people are not going to be, at first glance. And when I first read what Wilson wrote too, I was like, really, this is what they're going to do? But and I try not to be too deferential in my job as a columnist and have opinions. But I've got to give Brian Kelly some slack here. It's saying this is a guy who's been a head coach for more than 30 years and won more than 300 games, and it will be in the College Football Hall of Fame one day. If he thinks this is the best way to go, it's at least worth seeing how they can do it better this year. Wilson, didn't he say something earlier last year that he was kind of taken aback by how that didn't work out, or how things didn't work out on defense? It was something like, man, I really thought this was all going to work. Or these guys were going to make it work, and it didn't.
I don't remember exactly what I don't remember that exactly.
It was just like they didn't get what we were trying to tell them, or something like that. You kind of got an early sign of it. And of course, after the Florida State game, they went away from Harold playing inside linebacker, but he never really got back to doing what he did as a freshman, obviously. And teams were more prepared for him anyway. But it's on the player, it's on the coaches. It's got to be about it. Clearly, Wilson, would you say that this is what Harold Perkins and his team, his family, his people want him to do as far as his future in the NFL? They want him to be playing this position?
In terms of, Harold or his camp, we don't know. I mean, we've barely ever gotten to talk to Harold, and the one time that we did, we sort of tried to ask him about this. It was after the Missouri game. He was basically like, I'll play any position. It doesn't matter. But what we do know is that LSU sees this as his long-term future. Brian Kelly has said this back to last year that Harold will be an off-ball linebacker in the NFL, and that came up again in my conversation with him on Monday that Harold Perkins will be this kind of linebacker in the NFL. That's his future. And so they're trying to get him ready for that.
It behooves LSU to make this work for him because not just us, obviously other players, future recruits, other coaches can see what an enormous talent he is. He's a rare gem, and they've got to show they can that they can develop him properly. This is a very obviously a watershed decision it seems like to me for this team, for this defense, for Harold, and for the future of the program. Big.
Go ahead, Wilson. I'm sorry, you're going to jump in.
No, I guess the only thing I would add to this discussion, like y'all were mentioning how, don't expect this to just mean Harold's pigeonholed in in a spot. Like you can do things like y'all were saying with these linebackers. Like this is probably more applicable like first and second down. Like on third down, you're going to bring in sub packages. One of the things Brian Kelly mentioned was third down packages that Blake Baker has. Like they'll probably be a little bit more exotic with what they do on Harold on third down in particular. Like that's a great opportunity for sub package to come in and him to rush the passer. I think this is a little bit more applicable, like I said, to first and second down. And if Blake Baker's defensive style translates here to LSU and continues, then there will probably be other instances where you see him blitzing. And the other thing that we also didn't get into, and I didn't think to ask Brian Kelly this until after the fact, so it's kind of on me, but we'll find out as we go through the spring, is what this means for Whit Weeks. Whit Weeks would be the weak side linebacker if Harold wasn't kind of moving inside, and maybe LSU goes to more of a 3-3-5 and it just has three linebackers on the field with Whit and Greg Penn and Harold, and maybe they just do rotating and everybody gets plenty of snaps. But it is going to be interesting to see because if LSU was to go and try to run like a 4-2-5 as its base defense, and you just had the two inside linebackers on the field, that's most likely Greg Penn and Harold Perkins. And so what does this mean for Whit is something else to keep track of throughout the spring, because that's somebody else now going into his sophomore year who has a lot of promise.
And Greg Penn he's such a steady performer. 2 years started now, had 89 tackles last year, I think second on the team in tackles. He's got to be part of that mix. That's going to be very interesting to see, as Wilson said, because Whit Weeks can be that disruptive force as well. As Harold Perkins in that vein.
And this also goes back to maybe what we were talking about having confidence in the skill level of the players that you actually have, which is, who knows how this thing is all going to play out, obviously, but Harold Perkins, Whit Weeks, Greg Penn. Don't you feel pretty good about that set of three linebackers right there, and or whoever else may also come down the line and have significant playing time?
You do feel good about that group in turn. Like if you're looking at LSU's defense, it's hard to say anything like an overwhelming strength coming off of last year, but that's your strength is those three linebackers there in the middle. Whose phone's going off?
It's mine. I'm sorry. I'm trying to. My daughter's calling, so I got to take care of that. You guys continue on. I'm sorry.
Well, Rab,
go ahead.
Rab, if we're going to take over for Perryn here in terms of hosting for a second, maybe, then let me ask you this. Going into the spring, kind of, what are you most interested to see what LSU can do defensively? Like if you could glean, we already kind of touched on this, but like, what are you wanting to see out of this defense, like to get to that signs of improvement? I think we already might have remembered this, but
showing they can be, just more fundamentally sound. Like I said, we're not going to see a lot of tackling to the ground, except for maybe in a scrimmage here or there, or maybe the spring game. But just more, ready to make a play, in position to make a play, and just look more confident in what they're doing. I think that's now that we know that Brian Kelly thinks that things were kind of lost in translation last year between the former defensive coaching staff and these players. That is the communication better? Are they going to get it more? Defense doesn't have to be really complicated, especially at the college level. It's a lot about attitude and confidence and desire and hitting hard. The other defenses that hit harder than LSU because they just maybe weren't sure of their angles or their assignments or whatever. So those are the things, and being more disruptive. To me, really good defense anymore is and with an offense like again we anticipate LSU to be pretty good. You don't have to hold the team to 80% make them punt 80% of the time. A lot of it is being disruptive. It's putting them in a 3rd and long or forcing the turnover. And those are also things that LSU wasn't always.
Oh my gosh, third down defense last year was abysmal. Yeah, that's something else LSU has to get figured out is third down defense. LSU was teams converted 44.8% of the time on third down against LSU last year. That was 117th in the country. And so third down is going to be absolutely vital. That was one of the most critical areas of defensively that LSU had last year. And one of the reasons it was such a bad defense was it could not get off the field. And that is going to be something Blake Baker has to prioritize and fix right away. And because you saw all of LSU's defensive problems always showed up on third down. And that was like when they got drawn out the most. And so, again, I don't think in the spring we're going to really be able to tell, but that's something that's going to have to improve immensely is third down defense. The other thing, is there's quite a bit of position battles kind of up for going on here defensively. Cornerback, obviously they have a situation at defensive tackle. We haven't talked about it much, but sort of the edge rusher position is we kind of know who's there, but there's some new players.
That was going to be something I wanted to get into. Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Wilson. I'm sorry.
Well, no, you take it away, Perryn.
Well, I was actually going to, again, this goes back to, okay, you feel pretty good about the names that you've got. I'm thinking of Deshaun Womack, but also Savion Jones. I know we've discussed this almost ad nauseum, but listen, at however many months ago this was, in August, did Brian Kelly not say that he believed Savion Jones was poised for a monster year? And I believe
the word was
used
monster.
Those words.
Yes.
Yeah, monster year. He finished with 33 tackles, and he had 2 fewer sacks than he did in 2022. He had 2.5 sacks, if I'm reading this right, and my eyes are shot. So yeah, 2.5 sacks last year. And I don't know, this has been, he's one of the guys who was playing a yard off the line of scrimmage. And so maybe that's a technique thing, or certainly some sort of weird coaching, something or other that's not getting through. But also he had more weight. And so was it a question, did that slow down, did that impede his ability, his moves, his pass rush techniques? Did it just slow him down too much? Who knows? And then that begs the question, and I genuinely don't know whether this has been discussed yet, Wilson, but do they want him to lose weight? Do they want him to stay at the weight he's at and they think they can coach him up and keep him where he is? Do they want him to try to gain weight? And hey, you've got a deficiency at defensive tackle, so let's see if we can't get something out of him there. Do you know anything? Can you enlighten us a little bit about what's going on there?
Well, probably not to the full degree. That wasn't a question we got to with Brian Kelly on Monday.
Right.
But we know this much. When you talk about the weight, Savion himself, talking to him early last season, said that was something he was trying to kind of having to learn how to play with. And we don't know, because we didn't get to talk to him really again, if that was something that he continued, like if he ever felt comfortable or not. But obviously from what we saw in him in terms of his production, he never really ended up having the year that anybody predicted. It doesn't seem like he's going to get moved to defensive tackle. Like you said, that suggestion of maybe adding more weight and just changing his position. I don't think that they should do that. I don't see that happening. LSU might end up experimenting with some of these defensive ends, playing, your 5 technique, your 3 technique sort of defensive tackle here in the spring. One name that Brian Kelly mentioned was freshman Ahmad Bro. It was an interesting choice for that because he's like 6'3", 250. You've got guys like Savion Jones, who's 280 pounds, or even Gabe Relaford, who's bigger than Ahmad Bro, another freshman defensive end, or Perryn Keys, who's even played some defensive tackle.
That's right.
Who might make a little bit more sense for that. And so maybe we'll see some of it. This is the time of year when it's worth experimenting with it somewhat. But the name that Kelly threw out there was Ahmad Bro. So I don't necessarily see them doing that with Savion. But he does either need to, under some new coaching here with Kevin Peoples as the sort of the defensive ends and edge rushers coach, really be able to improve upon his pass rush technique at this higher weight, and be able to kind of get strong in that position. We could also end up seeing a situation where Perryn Keys gets more playing time. He played really pretty well last year. It certainly
he came on certainly
lesser role.
Yeah, he came on certainly toward the end of the year. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, that's just what I was going to say. I think that's someone else to keep an eye on here in the spring. And it is that, how much are they going to rotate? Because maybe that's the solution, is really rotating him and Savion because it seems like they could probably both have a role in this defense.
And how much of a difference could it make, or would it make, if LSU were to be able to get some pressure on the quarterback? How many times, you guys, obviously you mentioned third down, which incidentally, and I swear I'm not trying to pick on Savion Jones. Savion Jones's numbers went down from one year to the next. And similarly, Matt House had said going from 2022 into 2023 that they wanted to improve on third down defense, and it actually got worse. So, how much easier would life be if you've got a couple of defensive ends or a couple of good edge rushers crashing down on that quarterback on 3rd and 12, instead of them having plenty of time to pick apart the defense. So, defensive tackle, Wilson and or Rab, either one of you who wants to tackle this position first. I think we all probably agree and have said previously that this is a spot that they're probably still not done yet with, in terms of roster management and trying to go out on the free agent wire and find somebody between now and the beginning of the summer. So probably a good time, no better time than now to just sort of reset that position.
Well, they've got now basically 5 defensive tackles going to spring practice, 5 scholarship defensive tackles going to spring practice, because Kimo Makaniole, a backup offensive lineman, is the offensive lineman who's going to be switching positions. Brian Kelly hinted that was coming back in February, and then but didn't say who was going to be at the time. And now we've learned it's going to be Kimo. And he's somebody who's 6'4", 310. He's played in 9 games as a backup offensive lineman over the last 3 years. So if you were kind of looking at the offensive line, here going into spring practice, he's the one who probably makes the most sense. He would probably be on the 2 deep on the offensive line because of his experience, but you've got some really talented young players coming in. And I think he played some defensive line in high school. And so, that gives them some depth, but we really don't know exactly if he's going to be a really viable backup or even a viable rotational player after just switching over there, here in the offseason. LSU, outside of him, Demiron Johnson is an early enrollee who's going to be here in the spring. Joan Washington, junior college transfer here in the spring. And then your 2 redshirt seniors, Jalen Lee and Jacobian Guillory. And then LSU's going to have some walk-ons to kind of take on some snaps there. And like we already talked about, the possibility of using some defensive ends at the defensive tackle position a little bit. But it is vital to go and get some more help there in the second portal window. We've already talked about before how LSU's over the 85-man scholarship limit. But regardless of that, you're going to see some guys leave in that second portal window, and most likely anyway. Depending on how many leave, and this is kind of a college coaches cut players or encourage them to move on. That kind of thing happens. You don't want to do too much of that. You don't want to get a reputation for doing that. But as that kind of stuff happens, they'll have space, and they need to go and find defensive tackles, because I think I don't think we're going to be able to make much of what they have at defensive tackle here in spring practice, because they probably need to go and get some more. I think we're all expecting that. And so it's a position to see what happens with the guys who are currently on campus here in the spring, how they look, what they're able to do. But it still feels like it is an absolute position of need.
Rab, is this not part of why, I shouldn't say this isn't exclusively why, but isn't this part of why you paid Bo Davis a good amount of money?
Oh yes, and he used to play defensive line for LSU, so it'd be nice if he could get out there with a helmet and some shoulder pads on. Maybe just slip him out there. Who's that guy?
I had a different idea about how he impacts that position, but go ahead.
Right, but yeah, I mean he's known as I believe a Pete Jenkins disciple, right? He's known as one of the best technicians in the game at that position, and they're going to have to work some kind of magic, because this is, I think we all feel like, I do anyway, the LSU has the potential to be a college football playoff team and an expanded 12-team playoff. But this is the position that could be their undoing, because you got to be good on both sides of the line of scrimmage. And the offensive line, we talked about it last time we were all together for a podcast, certainly looks like a very one of the best strengths of the team. But this is not. And they're no national championship contender wants to be moving offensive linemen over, there's no national championship contender. It doesn't make you one when you have to move offensive linemen over to defensive tackle to try to
or for that matter, if one of your 5 or 2 of your 5 are freshmen. I mean, that's a position where you're some God bless them. Some Some of them could do it. Booger McFarland was a freshman who came in right away, but that's you can't typically bank on a freshman to do that. That's really part of the point I was getting at with Bo Davis, because you have to assume, also known as a great, a technician and teacher, but also known as an ace recruiter. He's been spending a whole lot of time in Texas lately. Maybe he doesn't bring in one of his old Longhorns. Maybe that doesn't happen, but you have to think that somewhere along the recruiting trail, he has, forged a decent relationship with some kid whose name we don't know, but he happens to have been a 2-year starter at TCU or some such play. You know what I'm saying?
For a transfer, you mean? Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. Let's just call it what it is. They need to catch a break. They need something like that. They need somebody to not fall in their lap, but someone they can get who can contribute, at least be a solid backup or something like that. Or more than one. Obviously would be ideal. So they got to get a break at that, and obviously those are the kind of player. This is one of those positions where everybody wants. To find a great defensive lineman. Because this is really important. This is what I've always said. What started the SEC's run of dominance with all these national championship teams over the last
dominance on a defensive line. Yes.
Defensive line dominance. And if you're not great there, then it's hard to be great at all. And I'm not saying LSU couldn't do what it's got to get to the playoff, but it's going to be a harder road. So yeah, they've got to come up. This is Bo Davis. They're paying him a lot of money to be a defensive line coach, and this is where he's going to have to earn it right away. And then eventually they'll get this position solved. The offensive line was in somewhat similar straits when Brian Kelly showed up. He's made it a priority and a point of emphasis, and now you're like, oh, they've got not only talent but depth. And I think they'll get this figured out here eventually. But for this year, it again illustrates the fragility that still exists with this LSU roster in certain positions, and this is number one on that list.
And to emphasize the importance of it, we're talking about moving Harold Perkins back inside. Well, your defensive linemen need to be able to properly fit things for your inside linebackers to come downhill. And so if LSU is struggling at defensive tackle, it might not matter who's playing inside linebacker kind of thing. Like they work in tandem, and so it's vital that they are strong enough or good enough at that position this year.
They need to keep. We understand that this is something Harold Perkins is going to want to have to improve on himself too. But those defensive tackles and defensive linemen need to keep the other guys, big guys, the offensive linemen, off of Harold Perkins. They need for Harold Perkins to be running around freely, not having to take on a pulling guard or whatever it is. So elsewhere, we haven't yet discussed the secondary, and what I figured would be a good place to start was a little bit of bad news, good news. Piece of information from Brian Kelly as it related to Zy Alexander. Not available just yet, but we now know that LSU believes he will be back eventually. Is that correct?
Yeah, he's expected to be full go for summer workouts, which is huge. And then, if barring any setbacks, be able to participate come preseason camp, which puts him on track to be available during the season. And preseason camp would only be 8 months post surgery on an ACL. Which has become more common, these days. But it's certainly still, you can't afford any setbacks for him to be ready for preseason camp. Now, people maybe dogged Zy Alexander somewhat last year, sometimes rightfully so. He wasn't perfect. He would have been a good number 2 corner on a much better defense. Instead, he was asked to be the number 1 corner on a bad defense, really last year. But that's a guy who started 8 straight games before he got injured, and probably would have just started out the rest of the season as well. And so clearly someone who, at least last year, LSU, trusted out there on the outside. And I think there were signs that he was getting, a little bit better throughout the season. And so that's a great piece of news that he will expect to be available come preseason camp. In the meantime, LSU is, and once he's healthy, he's going to be a factor in this competition. In the meantime, you're going to get eyes on everybody else who's there at corner. We know LSU's got numbers and some bodies there. And here in the spring, I think a few guys to really keep an eye on are, Jair Brown, Ohio State transfer cornerback, J.K. Johnson, the other Ohio State transfer cornerback who missed all of last season. We saw him somewhat in the spring last year. When at the time he got hurt, he was not a first-team guy. Obviously, as the season played out, he would have gotten a chance at some point. But now you get to see him that he's healthy. And then, there's certainly some other ones, but another name that kind of jumps out, just someone who we've heard some good buzz about, from winter workouts, is a freshman early enrollee, PJ Woodland. He's the only freshman corner who enrolled early, and that's going to be someone else to keep an eye on here but this is a wide open cornerback competition going into the spring. We also got, Ashton Stamps coming back as a now sophomore, and Jaden Toviano coming back as a sophomore, and Sage Ryan coming back after starting a bunch last year. And Sage and Javian are guys who maybe could play a different kind of position, could play nickel, could maybe even play that sort of star. I think Javian would be an excellent person to play that star position, or even move back up to safety. But we'll just kind of have to see how that all plays out as we get into, further down into the spring. It's going to be, I think, of all the position battles on LSU's roster. I mean, this is the one that's most unsettled, is cornerback.
I agree.
There's nobody with a lead on that at the moment.
The good news is,
so that's good. At least
I'm sorry. Say again, Reb.
There are players to choose from. There's
right.
They've collected cornerbacks or potential cornerbacks and nickelbacks. There's guys to choose from, unlike defensive tackle.
And most of them were on the team last year.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Say again, Wilson.
Sage Ryan.
Most of them were on the team last year. You weren't going into the transfer portal like you did the last 2 years.
Correct. That's correct.
Needing all these transfers to pan out, and it obviously didn't last year. You've got guys who are now been on the roster for at least a season in most cases.
Now you've got guys. You may not know exactly who's who, but you've got bodies to throw at the problem, so to speak.
What were you saying, Rob?
That's.
Yeah, sorry, we were talking over each other earlier. We were talking about, what are the things you're looking for, who you're looking for. That Sage Ryan is a player. I'm fascinated to see whether they find a place for him or not. But I mean, this is a guy. I believe he was a 5-star. Certainly people were excited when they got him to commit and come to LSU and coming out of Lafayette. And there's a talent. This is the kind of player. To me, it's like Brian Kelly's talking about communicating, getting them to understand, getting them to understand the concepts and play with confidence. This is a guy, because they asked him to do a lot last year, and he tried. It just wasn't always with a lot of success, and I think sometimes he had to be the poster child for the lack of success LSU had in pass defense. But there's ability there. Can they get it out of him? And if so, then maybe you've got one of those positions figured out, and he's can be a positive instead of someone who you're like, oh, he's part of the problem.
So Wilson, where do we stand at safety?
At safety, Major Burns has come back. So going into spring, he would be expected to be a starter. He's been a starter for a couple of years now. And then Jordan Gilbert, Texas A&M transfer, would be somebody else who I think came in to be a starter. He started 10 of 11 games at Texas A&M in 2022. Would have been a starter all year last year, most likely as well, before he had shoulder surgery. But there's some young guys who could maybe mix this thing up a little bit. I mean, Ryan Yates played a bunch in LSU's dime package last year. That's another a sophomore now with some experience. Deshaun McBride, early enrollee, one of the highest rated recruits in this class that LSU brought in, is someone else who's going to be back there. Kylan Jackson, who didn't play much last year because he was injured, is someone else who, now that he's healthy, will be kind of in the mix. And so, you've got these two experienced safeties with Major and Jordan who played a little bit more football, but you've got a bunch of young guys who, could come in and really maybe shuffle up the lineup here in some ways, because they've got some talent, but they just haven't played a ton at the college level yet. And so that's kind of thing to track at safety is it just going to, from start to finish, wire to wire, Jordan Gilbert and Major Burns, that's it? Or are these young guys going to be able to come in and do something to get themselves on the field?
So we're probably running up against the clock a little bit here, but I did want to ask, and Rab, of course, you've had plenty of experience. You sat out watching plenty of spring practice, and just sort of been through those seasons themselves. And of course, the same with you as Wilson as the beat reporter. Just generally speaking, what is reasonable to expect in terms of how much the LSU defensive staff can install, how much they can teach, how it's not going to be anywhere near a finished product by the time they're done with spring. But the question is, how much can they accomplish? How much farther down the road can they get from where they are, which is basically ground zero right now, aside from meetings?
Yeah, I mean, you'll initially, I think, throughout the spring kind of implement the playbook to some degree. But a lot of it will just be fundamental work and, working on the things that this defense needed to work on, the basic principles of running the football and playing the ball in the air and, tackling and sound gap defense, and just kind of getting those things put in place, and that you're laying your foundation. And then throughout the summer, they'll probably, install the defense on the whiteboard a few more times, so that going into preseason camp, everybody kind of knows what everybody's doing. That's sort of what you'll expect from spring practice. Is very vanilla in a lot of ways. It's not, but behind the scenes they'll be working on schematics and things like that. But it's just kind of laying down that foundation.
Rab, how much is reasonable to expect in terms of the amount of work you can get done in the spring?
I think spring for the LSU defense will be kind of like a construction site for a building. It's always a huge mess. There's mud everywhere, and there's pieces of wood lying around and different things, and it's going to look like a mess at times. But eventually, you get it all cleared away, and by opening day, maybe you have a cathedral, or at least a nice looking coffee shop. LSU's defense doesn't have to be a cathedral this year, but I don't. Maybe I'm being pie in the sky with this, but let's say LSU had the 100th best defense in the country last year. Maybe that's right a good number. Maybe that's being a little kind.
They were actually well, they were actually worse overall. But I actually went when we were talking about the secondary and the bad pass rush. They were 100th, Rab, on passing defense yards per attempt. So There you have it. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I just don't believe that they have the 100th best talent. In college, in FBS. I just don't really believe that, and I think they can be better and just be average and just get to average. We said, everyone said last year, what if they just had an average defense to go with this amazing offense they had? And no one expects the offense, if we go back to offense, to be quite as good last year. That's just not fair to expect them to lead the nation in scoring and total offense with a Heisman Trophy winning quarterback. It's not fair to expect that, but it's but just be average, and average can take this team a long way. I don't think we were talking about, was the last time they had a really good defense. I don't think the 29 defense was an all-time great defense at LSU either.
Well, but I think
it was criticized.
It was criticized, right? It was criticized, and there was the really kind of, speaking of messes, that the Ole Miss game that year was a mess. But part of that, I do think you have to. When Joe and the gang are over there on the other side going straight down the field and scoring, number one, you're sort of naturally going to get yourself into a track meet. Number two, the defense is not resting a whole lot. They had, because they had a couple All-Americans actually, and if not those, then you had some high draft picks and high pro prospects and things of that nature. But statistically, yes, you guys are absolutely right, and there were certainly times where they definitely did struggle. But generally speaking, would you have taken that? Would you have taken that year's defense? On the 2023 team? I'm gonna guess every single person in the world would say yes.
Well, absolutely, yeah. That's exactly what we're saying. If you had a defense that was like that wasn't necessarily top 10 elite, but good. Like you said, with a bunch of drafted players on it, and get the Thorpe Award winner at safety and all those things, you're maybe winning an SEC championship. You're at least much deeper into that conversation late November than you were this year, and you're in college football playoff contention. So yes, I think everybody agrees on
that. There weren't many defenses from any team anywhere that LSU fans wouldn't have taken over the 2023 defense by the end of the season.
One of the widest disparities in all of college football last year between scoring defense and scoring offense. Yeah, truly
extraordinary. That is an interesting question, though, in terms of when was, do we have to go back to the Les Miles era to find a really, really, lockdown defense, as I say?
It's tough because, modern college football, it's maybe a little bit more difficult, but there's also a cyclical nature to football, in that I think we've seen this on the NFL level a little bit more borne out than maybe on college, that, the defenses have sort of adjusted to what modern offenses have done to some degree. And so I think you would probably have to go back to that. But at the same time, I think defenses are maybe learning how to catch up in some ways. And so LSU needs to kind of get back onto the forefront of that and be able to, are you going to see 5 points, 8 points allowed per game kind of thing like you did in 2011? Most likely not. But you can at least try to get back to a point where you're allowing 17 to 20 points per game. I think that's a very reasonable expectation for what LSU needs to be defensively in these, 2024 and on. Maybe not in 2024, but I mean, like in this day and age in college football.
Sure.
Yeah.
Rab,
Baker's
Rab, I'll give it.
defense in Missouri. That's what they did last year, right? They were 25th in the country, allowing just over 20 points a game. I think LSU fans would be ecstatic to have a defense.
And they made
those kind of numbers.
the Cotton Bowl. So
Well, hey,
exactly.
Rab, I'm going to nail you to the wall here. On February 28th, I'm going to make you predict what's average points per game allowed for the LSU defense this season. We're gonna play this game 4 more times before the season starts, if not 40. But hey, on February 28th, how many points do they give up?
That's a good for the whole season. The whole season. 24.6.
Okay, we're gonna write that down, and you're gonna get fired if you're wrong. So
no pressure. That's good.
So no pressure. Yeah, go ahead.
Get out of here, though. I want to hear, like we did last week on the offensive podcast. If anybody hasn't gone back, listen to that and wants the offensive preview, that was up last week. I want from both of you your 3 most intriguing players to watch this spring. Who do you want to track and see?
Oh,
on the defensive side.
Look, I'll start with Savion Jones. I mean, I keep going back around to that, but Savion Jones would be one. Perkins. I mean, it sounds like a cop out, I know, but Perkins, against the backdrop of, okay, yes, he's going to move back inside. And I'll stay for now. I'll stay with the front 7, and I'll say Deshaun Woolback. I'd like to see, will he make that? There's loads of potential there, and he certainly made his mark here in certain spots last season. Can he do that thing where he now, okay, yes, he really turned the corner. Those are my 3 off the top of my head. Rab, you're up.
I mentioned Sage Ryan earlier, so I'm definitely going to go with Sage Ryan. I'm going to I can't say the guys you said, obviously. Then Braden Swinson, can he be a guy? 6.5 tackles were lost, and that was kind of splitting time with Ovi Ogufu. I never said his name right. I apologize. At that position, and can he be more of a force? There. And then Jacobian Guillory, he's got the experience. He's got the size and everything. It can the body. Can he be a guy who, like Wilson says, keeps the interior lineman off of Harold Perkins and let him make plays this year? So I'll go with those guys: Guillory and Swinson, and of course Sage Ryan.
I like all of those selections for various different reasons, and mine would probably be similar. Just to add to that, Jordan Gilbert, this transfer safety from Texas A&M, is he someone who can come in and really, make a difference right away? Deshaun Womack was one of my other ones, former 5-star, edge rusher type. What is he going to do here in year 2? Can he really start to actually have real playing time? And then my third one, I'll go just someone who we haven't mentioned, but it's almost overshadowed, like we said, because Harold Perkins moving back inside. But before we learned that Harold Perkins was going back inside, I think Whit Weeks would have probably been my other one. We saw a lot from Whit Weeks last year, so I think everybody probably just expects him to take that next step into starting and be a difference maker and all those things. But this is an important spring for him to maybe, as the first time as a full-time starter, to really step into that kind of role. But I like all the ones that you all said. Some of the ones in particular, I think Swinson's really fascinating as well. And we didn't even touch on him, but like J.K. Johnson would be probably another one at corner. But there's so many corners, so it's just like all the corners.
Right.
As well. So
we don't. There's not just one of them to pick that you could say, okay, he's one of the 3 people here. The other one more before we get out of here. There's because you meant what are you 2 gentlemen? Well, both you 2 gentlemen might have mentioned it, but Paris Shand, I think, given how he sort of came on toward the end of last year, I think that might be interesting too, especially if they do, get themselves in a pinch and say, oh, we're going to have somebody play emergency defensive tackle in addition to trying to rush the pass rusher. So, or rush the quarterback.
I think what is obvious from our variety of answers, though, is that it's at every single level of the defense that there's intrigue.
100%.
Very few answers. And we're, like you said, the whole offseason is just going to be fascinating to see what we can learn about this defense and how it unfolds, because there are no sure things at really any spot.
But there are plenty of potential plenty of potential answers. We just don't know what they're going to be and where they're going to be. So, look, gentlemen, this was This was an odd episode, not through any fault of you guys. I'm here in Florida, and there's jackhammering going on outside my hotel room, and it's been driving me nuts. And then my daughter calls in the middle of it. But look, LSU football. We give you a good strong hour of LSU football talk on February 28th. I hope all our readers and viewers will be thankful for that, because this is never a bad time to talk about football. So, gentlemen, we certainly appreciate you taking out some time, taking out an hour. We need to remind everybody that, of course, we're here on Monday and Thursday, every Monday and Thursday on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever the finer podcasts are found. We are here more importantly, we are here live on YouTube, on our YouTube channel, LSU Tigers on NOLA.com. You can catch us there live. If you don't catch us there live, you can catch us after the fact. We've talked about football for an hour, so there's going to be more of this coming every Monday and Thursday, thanks to Champion Wealth Strategies. To learn more about Champion Wealth Strategies, please go to Champion Wealth Strategies and plan like a champion today. Sign up for our newsletter. That's at theadvocate.com/LSU newsletter. And of course, subscribe to The Advocate. It's the number one destination for LSU football, and it always has been. Go to theadvocate.com to subscribe there. Gentlemen, I appreciate you all hanging out with me here for an hour. I'm not going to bring back any bath salts, but if there's anything from Florida you guys want, I'll be happy to do so.
Disney shortbread cookies.
Oh, that's a tall order. I don't know. You'll have to be good. No, we're gonna have to find out. I'll come back next year and bring them back for you if your prediction on the points allowed was correct. I think that's fair. Gentlemen, it's been a pleasure. We appreciate it. For Scott Rabalais and for Wilson Alexander, I'm Perryn Keys. This has been at the LSU